Well, firstly, thank you all for joining me for this conversation. I'm really glad that I get to facilitate. I think these protocols are really fantastic. We were just talking in the green room about the opportunity to seed some change and some different practices in the industry in an organic and kind of grassroots and practical way. So we'll get into all of that in just a moment. I feel like off the top, it might be helpful to contextualize the protocols just for folks who may not already be familiar. And so we're really fortunate to be joined by one of the research team in patients. So maybe just to begin with, I can ask you to give us a top-level overview of the research project and the protocols that came out of them.
Absolutely. So this was a very, like, when Tanya asked me to come on as the head of the research team, I thought we were doing like a small research project, but really the research had 4 phases. So first we started by getting in touch with decision makers in the industry, funders, broadcasters, streamers, and just ask them, what's your perspective on where the bottlenecks are, what the issues are, just to get a sense from what they thought, to get a sense of where we should be looking. And after having 14 90-minute conversations with the decision makers, we took that information and we did a very, very thorough literature review. We were just talking about how other organizations are doing very similar research, not the same, but similar types of work, producing their own protocols, looking at other underrepresented and underserved communities. So we looked at all of that, and then we conducted a number of focus groups where we involved women creatives and I guess women performers from all of the groups of interest, and sat down and asked them, okay, this is what we're seeing, reading, hearing from other people in the industry, but this is about you. So what do you think is happening? Why do you think we're seeing a disproportionate or a skewed distribution of opportunities when it comes to Black, Indigenous, and women of color who are performers or who are creatives? When I use the term creative, and when we use the term creative in the protocol guideline, we're talking about directors, writers, and producers. We use that term just to kind of be quick with it. So yeah, we had those focus groups. That's where we got a bulk of the information from kind of experience perspective, because really this research is very, very intersectional. It's not about racialized and Indigenous people or Black, Indigenous, and racialized people. It's not just about women. It's about what happens when both of those groups overlap and intersect, and how is that experience very, very unique in the on-screen depictions and in the way that art is created, or the barriers that exist to creating art that tells those stories. So after speaking to Black, Indigenous, and women of color who are either performers and creatives, then we really wanted to look at the audience. One of the things that we found in this 3rd phase when we had these focus groups is that there are real-life consequences to Black, Indigenous, and women of color not being in the room when the content is produced. So we learned that a lot of these creatives and performers were seeing that their domestic violence may be going up as a result of the depictions that we're seeing on screen, because they're not nuanced, they're not depicting women, Black, Indigenous, and women of color as full human beings. So we wanted to go to the audience and say, okay, audience, when you watch the most celebrated work in Canada, when you watch television that's on at prime time and has really, really broad, large audiences, what do you think when you see these characters? And we saw a lot of the same stuff. So we did our own audience study, and then Ipsos did their own audience study, both of them kind of revealing some of the same things, that the depictions of Black, Indigenous, and women of color are dangerous. Dangerous from the perspective that they demean us to the point where we're not seen as full human beings, but also dangerous in that they are reproducing stereotypes that are continuing to make it challenging for inclusion. And then our last step, after all of that, so remember I told you at the beginning, I was told, come and help us do some research. And then I did all of that and still Tanya wanted more. So after that, we took all of our learnings and then we went back to the industry. And you may have seen an email come into your inbox. We did an industry survey where we spoke to anyone who identified as a part of the industry and found even more critical insights. So that's what the protocol guideline reports on, what the research study reports on, and yeah, please read it. That's our protocol guideline.
And so this conversation is obviously specifically about how unions and guilds can help put these protocols into practice. I'm wondering, how did you identify, or why did you identify unions and guilds as such important vectors to help these protocols become standard practice?
I really love this question because if you read the protocol guideline, we have like yellow pages throughout the guideline that highlight what specific groups of people need to do, what line producers need to do, what directors need to do, what agents need to do, talent agents and casting directors, and we don't have a page for unions. The reason why we don't have a page for unions is because we very much see ourselves acting in solidarity with the unions already. We think that, yes, clap, 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 yay. We very much see unions as the strongest advocates for safety, both like physical safety and psychological safety of their members when they go to work. And so this work cannot be done, what Reelworld is doing through this research cannot be done without the information that we got from ACTRA, the reports and data we got from WGC. All of this has been done, like we're standing side by side to produce that. So that's why if you read the protocol guideline, we don't have a page for unions, but we're very much interested in supporting the work of unions, as I feel they are interested in supporting the work that Reelworld does.
Which is a great segue to our next question, and that is exploring from the union side, when a protocol like these guidelines is released, or we get new research about an aspect of the industry that is pertinent to your work, how do you sort of take those on board internally at your organizations? What does it look like to discover this new research, or to potentially even collaborate in its production initially, and how do you think about incorporating that into what you do?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Glinton. My pronouns are she, her, and I work at ACTRA National. So thanks for the question, Julian. I think one of the most powerful tools that unions have is to codify language into our collective agreements, right? And so I think, as many of you are aware, a lot of the unions are in negotiations with the producers this year. So ACTRA is one of them, and we'll be bargaining with the CMPA in November and December. And one of the things that we refer to when looking at language for our proposals is past documents like this that have been published by the Indigenous Screen Office. WGC, and as well as information that's coming directly from our performers through focus groups. So we're constantly doing consultations with performers, and so I think going into our next round of negotiations, this protocol will be very helpful in helping us craft that language, and some of it is going into our negotiations for the fall, because again, we did this research in collaboration with Reelworld, right? So a lot of the findings are coming out of performer focus groups that were facilitated by ACTRA, including, having that conversation with performers about hair and makeup. That's something that we've heard time and time again, particularly as ACTRA has taken up this issue of hair and makeup inequity on set. And so that's certainly one of the things that we'll be looking to do. And I think the other thing is, of course, spreading the word to our members and letting them know that this is available to them. This is information that we want them to share amongst each other as well.
Victoria, did you want to speak to that as well?
Sure. Victoria Shen, Executive Director, Writers Guild of Canada. So we publish an annual diversity report, which we actually just released, so I hope you haven't had a chance to take a look at it. And that is a report that we do annually, and it's quantitative as well as being qualitative. So really what we look at is who's working, who's in our union, who's working, and how much money are they making, right? And based on that really data-based information, we also make policy and bargaining type decisions. We also, I will also read all the reports that come out. I teach at the Oscar Certificate of Entertainment Law. I teach the workplace harassment session. So as part of that training, I always push out all the reports that I've seen over the years that I think are still excellent. Being seen from the BSO is still fantastic. So I still, there's some great stuff out there, like NABET did this really cool thing a number of years ago that was looking at grip kind of terminology that's like problematic. So it's like there's tons of stuff that is new, but there's also stuff in the past that's been done, so I always try to push that out. What I will say is that a lot of organizations, whenever they do anything that involves writers, they'll often contact us and talk to us. So, I was on the board of Reelworld a number of years ago, so I actually remember when we did the funding proposal for this initiative, so I've been involved throughout the years, so it's so amazing to see the report come out. I know how much work it's been over the years, so I'm just so thrilled to see it out. So Reelworld, so much respect for all the staff and Tanya and the work that they continue to do, which takes years and years to do. Also, like ACTRA, I know you did a best practices for hair and makeup, and you guys were great with consulting us as well. So, I think we try to be really good partners and allies to other organizations in the industry that are doing this work, because it's still incredibly important.
Luisa, did you want to add anything on this question?
For sure, yeah. So, for us at ACTRA Toronto, because we're branch specific, so we have, national where Lauren is, and that's where a lot of our policy comes from, but at the branch level is where we're talking to the productions and the producers. And so then having something like this is really helpful so that when producers are reaching out because they're unsure of how to do something, or casting directors, people want answers. They want kind of like a to-do list, and obviously I always tell people this requires conversation, but this is a good starting point to be like, this is, first I point them to reports such as this, really you can inform yourself this way so that, you have that information, and then you can make, good decisions as to how to approach conversations, how to ask the right questions. So, with this, it is, it's not just me being like, I think this is what you should be doing. It's like, here's research, here is what is needed in the industry, and here are the recommendations for you to then have those sets that are respectful, be casting, when it comes to casting, like being respectful and all of that. So this just helps to just have more information so that, many times people say, well, I just didn't know. It's like, no, you can't say that anymore because the resources are out there. You just have to take the time to go and read them.
Maybe I can stick with you, Luisa, and then we can come back. And I would love to just invite you to speak about anything in the content of the protocols themselves that resonated with you for whatever reason. Maybe it's something that reflected a sentiment that you often hear from your membership, or maybe you thought, oh, great, these protocols are addressing this issue, which often kind of goes under the radar a little bit. Of course, again, we hope everyone gets the chance to read them, but I think giving folks a sense of the flavor of what these protocols actually contain is really valuable here. So we'd love to know what jumped out at you.
For sure, yeah. So for me, it was the section on casting directors, and it was the part talking about open ethnicity roles. And this is something that I hear from our members a lot, that our BIPOC members normally do not audition for these roles because usually it doesn't go to BIPOC members. And so it is the lack of specificity and the fear in being specific, because I will talk to casting directors when they're like, is it okay to say this? And I'll ask, like, what are you looking, is this actually open to everyone? And many times it's not. So it's like, well, then say that it's not. Like, if you're looking for, I'm Colombian, so if you're looking for a Colombian performer, ask for that. And so it is, again, it is the experience of so many performers, and then that also takes trust away, because there are roles that truly are open for everyone, but people are not going to be auditioning for them because, the trust is just not there. So it was, this resonated with me because this is what I'm hearing from our community, saying that they're just saying that they just want to tick a box to say that, oh yeah, we open this up to everyone, and then the role is not really going to go to somebody from our community.
One of the things that really resonated with me was like, we want to stop telling stories of trauma and servitude and violence, and we also want to see stories that are not entirely centered around the person's ethnicity. And so one of the reasons why that really resonated with me is because that kind of bias actually gets reproduced in terms of who actually gets hired to write these stories. So what we're seeing in our stats, for example, so particularly like writers with disabilities and Indigenous writers get the least amount of work of any diverse category. And that, along with Black writers, we see from year to year in our diversity report, significant shifts in how many writers are actually getting hired from year to year. So what that tells us is that basically when there is like an Indigenous show, Indigenous writers work. And when there's a show like Porter, lots of Black writers get to work. And when those shows get canceled, all of those people lose the work. So the percentage of writers, diverse writers that are getting hired, they're not necessarily in all the rooms across the industry. They are getting work when there are stories that are centered on them. And so what those writers are saying is like, great, I'm glad that people recognize that you need to have people with lived experience to write these characters and write these stories, but I'm also a damn good writer and I can write all kinds of different stories, right? So that kind of bias is so ingrained. And so as much as it's good that we're seeing more work opportunities and a recognition that we need authentic voices, at the same time, those writers are telling me, you know what, I can write other stories too.
For me, I think, the protocols related to hair, makeup, lighting, and wardrobe are definitely so representative of our members' experiences across the country. So as I mentioned, hair and makeup equity has been at the forefront of ACTRA National's DEIB work. And the reason for that is because it's gone unaddressed for so long. When I joined ACTRA in May, and I told friends like one of the biggest things under DEIB is hair and makeup, and I explained, a lot of Black performers, East Asian performers, Indigenous performers are still dealing with hair and makeup technicians that don't have the skills to service them. A lot of people are like, that's still an issue. It's been an issue for a very long time, and I think the protocols are great because they're based on conversations that your team had with our performers. And what they're saying is, have the conversation before we get to set. Performers want to make sure that they can focus on their performance. And so you need to remove that extra labor of having to do their own hair and makeup because the person on set isn't qualified. And in a lot of cases, they're not being compensated for that work, right? And it also takes time away from them preparing to do the job that they've been hired to do, which is to perform. And so I think those protocols are great, and they're very much in line with what we've been pushing for with the CMPA. ACTRA filed a policy grievance in 2021 to say that this inequitable provision of hair and makeup services is a violation of performers' rights to freedom from discrimination on set. And that's one of the earliest articles in our independent production agreement is freedom from discrimination. And so we definitely see this as an issue of hair discrimination, makeup discrimination, but it also takes work for the lighting department to also understand that their equipment may be programmed in a way that's biased, right? And so that's something that comes up in the protocol guidelines. And so I really think it takes a collective effort, and lighting and wardrobe and hair and makeup really work hand in hand. So that's definitely something that I think we could talk more about with members and industry partners.
I'd love to get into some more on the specifics of how you might be able to action some of these protocols. And so, Victoria, actually, you referenced one here, which I wanted to make note of. One of the protocols calls for the avoidance of defaulting to stories of violence, trauma, or servitude for women of color characters. This section also calls attention to common tropes like the white savior narrative. So I'm wondering, how might an organization like the WGC have a role to play in counteracting those types of potentially harmful narratives? Is there a means by which you can encourage your members to be mindful of these kinds of stereotypes, or what practically does that look like for you?
So I would say, sort of from our own research, like the issue isn't so much like at the individual writer. It's the system and the industry and the kind of historic bias that goes towards the kind of shows and the kinds of stories that are getting funded and the kind of people that they're getting hired. That's why we published a diversity report, and that's why this year we also published like a best practices guide to hiring diverse writers. Right now in the industry, we really see like a real unwillingness to invest in development and invest in writing. And like, if you want nuanced, diverse stories, you need to pay for that. That takes time to do. You need to hire diverse showrunners, and you need big writing rooms that have lots of different writers there from different backgrounds. That's how you get that authenticity. So when you have small rooms and you're not hiring the diverse writers, that's when there are problems. But what we're also seeing is even when diverse showrunners get hired, oftentimes they get paired with a more senior experienced showrunner, and that person is so often not diverse. So one of our recommendations is, if you want to support your diverse showrunner, give them a strong number 2, but make it clear that they're number 2, right? The other piece is that we're finding that even on shows that have diverse stories, diverse rooms, diverse showrunners, that those rooms tend to be more heavily monitored. And so producers, broadcasters are in the room. They want reports every day on what's being said, and that really hampers the creativity and people's ability to speak freely about these things. Even when the writing gets submitted, oftentimes they will get notes that are very problematic, because the executives who are getting the stories don't really have the cultural background or don't have the lived experience to understand what they are seeing. So they'll get notes back to say, well, I don't really think that's gonna happen, and they want to change things, but that's really taking away from what's making that story nuanced and interesting and authentic to begin with. Also, I would say that it's really challenging right now. Like, one of our reports basically showed that there's a real contraction in the industry right now, and that there's just generally much fewer episodes, much fewer hours of shows being made. And so when there's that kind of a contraction, K1, like, you might have noticed, like, a lot of the shows that you're watching now only have like 8 episodes. Like, there's a lot more room for character development when there's 22 episodes. And there's a lot more writers writing with diverse characters and diverse storylines when you get 22 episodes to work with. And also, when there is a contraction, it means that people are more conservative about the kinds of shows they're greenlighting and the kind of people that they're willing to work with. So it's always gonna be the same people who get to work, the same people at the top. And so one of the things like we've seen over recent years is like a lot more funding going into diversity programs and such. Well, now there is a contraction, and I'm seeing a lot of those programs go and a lot of those jobs and positions go as well. So I think it's just so important for organizations, all of us, also with Reelworld, to keep talking about diversity and ensuring that this is an important and ongoing concern, and that even with changes in the economy and changes in the market, that this is still a priority issue for us.
Maybe just following up on that, in the green room we were talking about these larger structural issues as well, right? WGC can only do so much at the individual level. Are there partners in particular? I know we had some folks in here from some of the national funders, for instance. I don't know if they're still in the room, but like, who could potentially support this work? Who could potentially get behind the establishment of these as best practices?
They're not right in the room right now, but we were really happy to see the recent CRTC decision, to see that funding is going to organizations like BSO, ISO, CISF. So that funding is going to organizations that are run by diverse communities that have much closer relationships to them. So we are hoping to see more, just like, yeah, I think changes at the funding level would certainly help. And I think when funders decide that these are priorities, boxes that you have to check, and this is what they're funding, we see changes immediately.
Yeah, and I think, Joy and Jessica were talking about consultations that were held in August. They consulted Luisa and I.
Okay.
And so in that case, they're not necessarily dealing with performers directly, right? They're dealing with and reporting on like directors, writers, producers, and so. But I think the fact that they wanted our input speaks to how much the CMF, is committing to systemic change. And I think, the other thing that came out of their previous strategy report was that the incentives work. The incentives increase representation. And so when we get increased representation in those creative roles, it's just a matter of time before we see increased representation across the board, right? Because if you have people in those decision-making positions, they're talking about these issues because they're impacted by them. So it's just inclusion begets inclusion. Accessibility begets accessibility, and so we need those folks to be in the room. And I think the programs that the CMF has introduced are a really good start.
Thank you.
And just quickly add to that, and I think it's really important then for the funders to be cognizant of the fact that this takes money. If you're asking a production to be inclusive, to be green, to be all of these things, well, you need to give them the money for that too. BIPOC and underrepresented productions are already working on shoestring budgets. And then you hold these standards and it's like, how are they supposed to do all of this? And so it is just having a comprehensive view of like, what is it that you're asking the productions to do, and then actually giving them the funds for it. And then ensuring that this is a viable career for people, so that people aren't just working for free or for super low wages, because this is work, this is a business. And so it is, the funders shouldn't just be giving out money. There has to be follow through to understand where there are issues with the production. Okay, so there was a gap there. What can we do better next time? Also understanding, this is a BIPOC production. Have a conversation then with the production. Do they have the right hair and makeup people? And if not, well, okay, let's go talk to the unions, make sure. And so it is, it's an ecosystem where you have to provide that support. The money is not just enough. Knowledge is also important, but then it is also understanding, because a lot of the time these are our tax dollars. So where did they go, and what came out of that? And we don't want to then be putting people in dangerous positions, and I said that was not safe for people, and all of that comes, the funders are making these decisions. If there's a production where performers were not in a safe environment, why was that, and how can we do better next time? And is it somebody that keeps getting funded? Should they keep getting funded if they keep having these issues?
And they should fund at a level that these productions can afford union labor, because diverse people want health care and retirement savings and health, safe workplace and a livable wage.
So I had a practical question for you, Victoria, but maybe I can come to the two ACTRA representatives as well. So another of the protocols refers to instances where performers are asked to pay out of pocket for expenses in relation to, say, accents or dialects. Is this the sort of thing, you mentioned agreements off the top. Is this the sort of thing that ACTRA could potentially seek to incorporate into an agreement? How might ACTRA have a role to play in encouraging the adoption of those kinds of protocols?
Yeah, and I think I actually want to turn it to Luisa, because the Toronto DEI committee has an accent discrimination subcommittee. And I think this has come up quite a bit for Toronto members.
Yeah, first of all, if anyone is asking any performer who is union to translate something on the spot, you can't do that. This is work that has to be paid, and if you need that, let the performer know. So we already do have things in our IPA, our Independent Production Agreement, which we negotiate with the CMPA, that do say what producers should and shouldn't be doing, what, also performers should and shouldn't be doing. So reach out to ACTRA, confirm what things are going on, like, is this okay, it doesn't feel right, please let us know. This is how we also then see that, this issue has come up a lot. It's not covered in our IPA. We should include that for the next round of negotiations. And then as Lauren mentioned, so accent discrimination is a big thing right now that, our community is trying to shine a light on. We're in Toronto. There's people from everywhere, but unless a role calls for an accent, our performers with non-traditional Canadian accents are not getting those roles. And so, as a union, we cannot tell productions how to cast. But so then the work that we do, and this is where our committees and our members come in, where we're then talking to the casting directors. We're talking to the writers, the producers, to let them know that this is something that they should be considering when casting. And a lot of the time, what I hear is like, I never thought about it that way, because the default is white, cis, able-bodied, North American accent, and so it's all of these things. So some things can go into the IPA, for example. People can't just translate on the spot, you have to pay them for that. But then something like accents, where you're also asking someone to do an accent that might not be from, their background. And so that's when, we're talking to the producers to say, well, why don't you cast somebody from that community? And then you'll get the accent, but it's also then having the resources for, the performer, where like they shouldn't be doing this. And I mean, I think apart from the accent, something where our performers are having to pay out of pocket is with hair and makeup. And so, and Lauren can speak further to this, but especially our Black performers, they assume that the hair and makeup people on set are not going to know how to do their hair. They're not going to know how to barber, or they've had instances where their hair has been permanently damaged. They have been scarred because the people that are hired do not have the skills for this. And so this is what our hair and makeup grievance was about, where we kept raising the issue and we were not able to really get any sort of consensus as the last round of bargaining, but we were able to then file a grievance, and it was successful. But it's that where, unfortunately, it's slow work, and it requires our performers speaking up when it is happening so that we know that it's happening. Sometimes we can do something right away, or, you know what, it's like, okay, we'll try to then build a case, build it into the next round of bargaining, but it is kind of, the main thing is we need to know what's going on so that we can fix it. But I don't know, Lauren, if you want to speak further to the hair and makeup.
Yeah, I mean, with hair and makeup, we, launched a national survey many years ago, and we've continued to consult with performers regularly. We also have an incident reporting form, so we can be made aware as soon as something happens. And, as Luisa mentioned, a lot of performers, even if they think, the person on set may have the products and equipment required, they often still bring something just in case, because they've been scarred, as Luisa said. And I think just to touch on the accent discrimination a bit, a lot of folks around the world are watching productions from everywhere, and this was noted in the protocol guideline, is that audiences are consuming media in very different ways than 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so if Canada really wants to compete on the global stage, we have to make the industry more accessible for immigrants. We have to make the industry more accessible for folks with disabilities who may have what would be considered a speech impairment, right? And so it's really important for us to, I think, actively work towards accent discrimination as a form of discrimination.
I remember when I was actually at ACTRA, we used to teach the respectful workplace training, and there was a woman, she's French-Canadian, and she got told that she had an accent, and she's like, I'm French-Canadian, like this is how I speak English, like French-Canadian is Canadian, you know what I mean? So like that kind of bias, it's like real life is so much more diverse and interesting, and the fact that we sort of wash it out is a real problem.
I did want to open up for questions, but maybe before we do that, I'm sure we have some talent and filmmakers in the audience. I'm wondering if anybody would like to speak to how someone who, if you read the protocols, you recognize an issue that you may have dealt with yourself, how might they go about seeking support in resolving that?
You should come talk to your union. Like when you come talk to us, you don't necessarily have to lodge a complaint. You can just come and talk to us if you have questions, and maybe we could just talk you through. Maybe there's stuff that you didn't know. It doesn't always have to be a violation of the collective agreement. We have a professional development committee that has been doing amazing work. We have webinars and stuff, and they've been doing these amazing advice columns. And it's just when you work in the business, there's just things that come up. And it's kind of like conflict management, but how do you deal with these issues in a savvy kind of way? And so like those advice columns are like super helpful and they're so great. One of the other things that we do at WGC is we also pair our new members with a more senior member. And so they can be the person that you have, you know, like professional questions about. Like there's sometimes the things that just happen and you just, this is like a problematic situation. Maybe you get a problematic note. Maybe you've got a workplace dispute with somebody that you're working with. Like there's all these like professional things. So maybe you're having a problem with your agent, you don't know what to say. So like we feel like that mentoring has also been really helpful. So you do have resources out there that are available to you through your union or guild. And I know all of our members are very happy to just help somebody out.
I think, yeah, reaching out and for us having those conversations, that is how we get to see where the barriers are, what do we need to do better. And an example of that was producers would be coming to us, especially BIPOC producers, because when they're casting, we may not always have the performers in our membership. And so this means that they would have, if these are low budget productions in Toronto specifically, they would have to pay a permit. And so BIPOC productions already not getting as much funds as other productions, and now they'd have to pay a permit. And so we heard that feedback, and so then we launched the Permit Access Fund, which is a fund supported by Warner Brothers Discovery that covers 50% of the permit for BIPOC to LGBTQIA+ and disabled performers, whether you're casting union or apprentices or non-union, and regardless of whether or not the performer plans to join the union, they can still access the fund. So it's about that authenticity, and again, this came from just productions and producers talking to us about these issues, and then, you know, our performers as well, because for a low budget production, like you're not getting paid that much, and then, you know, there's that permit fee. So there's ways to go about things, but we can't fix it, or sometimes, again, like the information or the fix might already be there, but you don't know that it is, so please do reach out. We have a lot of information. We can connect you, you know, with other organizations, but it is just about making use of your union.
Yeah, I think to Victoria's point, just come and talk to your union, because I think, you know, with our independent production agreement, for example, which covers all of Canada except for BC, there's so much that is protected in there, but I think, you know, and we could probably do a better job at member education, but it's not just wages, right? There are clauses in there that specify how much rest is required between shooting. You know, when you're supposed to get your first meal, how long of a break you get. There's so many protections in that IPA, and I think it would be beneficial for our members to just come to us, even if they're not sure that something is covered. We can be a source of support, right? Because I think it can also be very isolating when you experience an instance of discrimination or violence or harassment, and you don't know where to go. And so please come and talk to all of the staff at your union. I'm sure there's someone that can help.
Did we have any audience questions?
Sadly, we only have 5 minutes, so probably only have time for one question, and I'm not sure if my microphone is up yet, so project.
Okay, I'll project. Hi everyone, thank you so much. I think today we heard a lot about how, and I'm making this a little union specific because that's what we're addressing, but we talked about how unions are technically assisting other parties in implementing this protocol, right? But I would love to touch on how unions can implement this within themselves. And I ask this question, or I pose this concern, because Dr. Adamu earlier mentioned union solidarity, and that is so beautiful, and I 100% believe in that and champion for that. But unions are not always a safe space for all. And so when we say so easily, come and talk to us, are we ensuring that that is possible for everyone? So to say that I personally believe that there is room for unions to have a section within even this guideline and protocol. We don't want to present the idea that unions are perfect. We're not. We're not, you know, but we're
I think I may have spoken a little too strongly, but well, I mean, I still mean what I said. But I think when we were going through talking to decision makers, talking to performers and creatives, and talking to people who are operating in the industry, what kept coming up are the steps that the unions have already taken. That wasn't meant to say that there wasn't any additional work for unions to do. So I just wanted to say that right off the bat. And I also want to just include a couple of statistics, because in our study we found, 30% of 30% of our respondents said that they were experiencing harassment. 50% had experienced sexual assault at some point in their careers. 2/3 of the respondents had experienced like either overhearing or hearing someone very directly say something that was racially or sexually inappropriate on set or in a writer's room. So there's a lot of room for unions to do a better job of helping to make sure that sets and writers' rooms are safer for their members, absolutely. And I think that is what I would say that they could do a better job of. But because they're already at the table, going through this really huge grievance when it comes to hair and makeup, having these conversations about getting writers, newer writers mentorship throughout when they join the unions, I think is better than some of the other aspects of the industry. And we benefited from a lot of support and a lot of insider information from these unions while we were putting together this report. Yeah, is that clear? Is that?
That helps.
Yeah.
Like, that helps. It's just like, as a union member and like elected leader, I hear from the members a lot talking about, we say to report, but then we're like, well, we didn't always get follow-up, So it's like, that would be great data too.
Yes.
Like, okay, how many percentage of people had the cojones,
Yes.
the bravery to report? That's a big thing.
Yes.
But then how many were satisfied with the resolution, if any?
Absolutely.
Right? So
Absolutely.
I thank you. I thank the unions. And I thank Reelworld. Let's keep working together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Data is so important. I'm a data junkie, so thank
That
you.
resolution piece is a good, like we don't usually talk about, we talk a lot about reporting. Oh yeah, this happened, but that resolution piece is a real gap across this industry and other industries. People don't talk about, okay, I resolved it. In my opinion, it's resolved.
Yeah.
But then you don't go back to the person to say, are you good? Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge your point, Mercedes. You're right, like unions have not always been a safe place for everyone. And so maybe it was a bit dismissive to say, come and talk to us. But I think that there's a lot of change that's happening at ACTRA in particular, especially with the establishment of the DEIB role at the national level. I'm covering Jen Paul's mat leave, so some of you may know Jen Paul. She's the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And so, I think the systems have historically not been in place to respond to concerns from members, and I think ACTRA is certainly doing what it can to get there. But yeah, I mean, that policy grievance probably should have been filed 10 years ago. But it really depends on who's at the helm and who's willing to go there and to fight, right? And so I think Marie Kelly, who's our National Executive Director, has really taken this issue on, along with Eleanor and lots of members who have brought this to ACTRA's attention nationally. But I just wanted to acknowledge your comment and say that that's very valid, and thank you for raising that.
I do just want to add to that, and thank you, Mercedes. That is the importance of having roles like ours, because when I talk to members of the industry, many tell me that they're scared to first go to kind of like the business side of ACTRA, and so having somebody who is a part of the community, who is understanding where members are at, and so when I say reach out, I mean reach out to me. I'll have that conversation first with you. I'll explain to you things about the union, and then you might feel comfortable to like, is it a report that you want to file? Is it that you want to go ACTRA for your production? And so it is having, because I know we have not done well in the past, and so it is rebuilding that trust and establishing those relationships, and just being open to people reaching out, and not just it just being like a business transaction, but like, let's sit down, let's have a chat. And I think that's why it's so important for us to be at these events so that we are connecting with the community. So thank you for that.
I wish we had a bit more time to get to the other two questions, but if you are around for the afternoon, perhaps folks can find you and at least have the conversation. So with that, I'll just ask you to thank again our panelists. And thank you.
And thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.